The world above was a canvas painted in perpetual spring, a masterpiece curated by Demeter, the Lady of the Harvest. Her dominion was life itself, the surge of sap in ancient oaks, the unfurling of tender green shoots piercing damp earth, the heavy-headed sway of golden wheat in the breeze. Her laughter echoed in the rustle of leaves, her tears fell as nurturing rain, and her very breath was the warm wind that coaxed blossoms from their buds. And at the heart of this vibrant realm, the very emblem of its unspoiled beauty, was her daughter, Kore. Kore, the maiden. Her name was a sigh of youth and innocence. She moved through the sun-drenched meadows of Sicily like a living flower, her steps light, her laughter a melody that drew butterflies and songbirds. Her hair, the color of ripened wheat kissed by the sun, streamed behind her as she ran. Her eyes held the clear blue of a midsummer sky, reflecting the simple joys of her world, gathering wildflowers with her companions, the Oceanids, weaving garlands of violet and crocus, feeling the cool grass beneath her bare feet. She was the embodiment of the surface world's ephemeral perfection, untouched by shadow, her spirit as bright and open as the day. Demeter watched her daughter with a love as deep as the roots of the world. Kore was her solace, her greatest joy, the radiant core around which Demeter's own vast power tenderly orbited. The goddess knew the darkness that existed beyond her green borders, the chthonic realms ruled by her stern brother, Hades, deep beneath the fertile soil she cherished. But that was a separate world, a necessary counterpoint perhaps, but one that held no claim on her luminous child. Kore belonged to the light, to the burgeoning life, to the eternal spring Demeter wove around her like a protective cloak. Their days were a rhythm of simple contentment. Kore would rise with the dawn, greeting Helios as his chariot began its ascent, scattering diamonds of dew across the fields. She'd join her mother in the sacred groves, where Demeter taught her the secrets whispered by the seeds, the language of the turning seasons understood only by the earth and its guardian. They'd walk together through fields heavy with promise, Demeter's hand resting lightly on Kore's shoulder, a silent communion between the source of life and its most perfect expression. Kore's questions were endless, sparkling like sunlight on water. Why does the poppy close at dusk, mother? How does the bee know which flower holds the sweetest nectar? When will the first grapes blush purple? Demeter answered each with patience and delight, her wisdom flowing as naturally as the streams that fed the meadows. Kore's companions, the graceful Oceanids, daughters of the Titan Oceanus, were constant presences, their laughter mingling with Kore's as they danced in circles, their white robes swirling, or floated lilies upon placid ponds. Life was a hymn sung in the key of pure, unadulterated joy. Yet, even in this idyll, subtle currents moved beneath the surface. Kore, in her innocent wanderings, sometimes strayed near places where the veil between worlds felt thin, crumbling cliffs overlooking the restless sea, deep, shadowed caves exhaling cool, damp air, or ancient groves where the trees seemed to whisper secrets older than the gods themselves. She felt a strange pull in these places, not of fear, but of profound curiosity. A coolness on the warm air, a scent of rich, dark loam and stone utterly different from the sun-baked earth of the meadows, a silence that felt deeper than mere quiet. Once, near a fissure veiled by cascading ivy, she thought she heard a distant, rhythmic sound, like the slow, measured tread of something immense and patient far below. She shivered, a sudden gooseflesh rising on her sun-warmed arms, and quickly turned back towards the familiar riot of wildflowers and the sound of her friends calling her name. The feeling lingered, though, a tiny, dark seed of unknowing planted in her sunlit soul. She mentioned it to no one, least of all her mother. Demeter's world was light and growth. Kore sensed, instinctively, that speaking of deep earth and cool shadows would bring a cloud to her mother's serene brow. So, she kept the strange pull to herself, a secret pocket in her heart, while above, Aelios drove his chariot across an untroubled sky, and the bees hummed their ceaseless song of summer. The unease Kore felt near the world's edges was a mere whisper compared to the storm gathering unseen. Far below the sunlit meadows, in the sunless, echoing vastness of the underworld, Hades, Lord of the Dead, stirred upon his obsidian throne. Silence reigned in his realm, a deep, resonant quiet broken only by the faint sighs of the newly arrived shades guided by Hermes, or the distant, mournful trickle of the river Styx. His palace, carved from the living rock of Erebus, was a place of stark grandeur, lit by the cold, phosphorescent glow of rare gems and the flickering souls of the just. Order was paramount here. The endless procession of the dead required an implacable, impartial hand. Hades was that hand, stern, remote, a sovereign administering an eternal kingdom. Loneliness was the air he breathed, the weight of his crown, the very stone of his halls. His gaze, when it occasionally turned upwards, wasn't drawn by the frivolity of Olympus, where his brothers Zeus and Poseidon reveled, but by the persistent, vital energy radiating from the world Demeter nurtured. And within that world, one figure burned brighter than all others, Kore. Reports trickled down, carried perhaps by wayward shades or the ancient, earth-rooted spirits who traversed the boundaries. Tales of her beauty, her radiant vitality, her laughter that echoed like a challenge to the pervasive silence of his domain. Hades, shrouded in perpetual twilight, found himself captivated by this creature of pure sunlight. It wasn't merely desire, it was a profound, aching need. A need for life, for vibrancy, for something beyond the endless grey procession and the weight of eternal rule. He saw in Kore not just a maiden, but the missing essence his realm lacked, the spark of spring that could pierce the gloom. Possession became an obsession, a dark root twisting through his thoughts. He knew the obstacles. Demeter's fierce devotion was legendary. Zeus, his powerful brother and king of the gods, was notoriously unpredictable, swayed by whim and persuasion. Yet, Hades was a god of formidable power and ancient rites. He decided to act. Ascending to Olympus, he sought an audience with Zeus amidst the clouds and ambrosia. The contrast was stark. The bright, chaotic energy of the gods court against Hades' own somber stillness. He found Zeus presiding over a raucous feast, nectar flowing freely. Hades, ignoring the curious stares, spoke directly to his brother. His voice, unused to Olympus's brightness, was low and resonant, carrying the weight of the deep earth. Brother, Hades began, cutting through the revelry. My realm is vast, eternal, necessary. Yet, it lacks a queen. A consort to bring light to the shadows, to temper the endless silence. I look upon the surface world, and I see Kore, daughter of Demeter. She is life incarnate. I ask for her hand. Grant me this, Zeus, and the balance between our realms will be strengthened. Zeus, his brow furrowed slightly by nectar and the interruption, considered. He saw the logic, perhaps, a marriage binding the chthonic to the celestial, a political alliance of sorts. He saw Hades' uncharacteristic intensity, and, perhaps, he saw an opportunity to manage his formidable sister Demeter, whose power over the lifeblood of the world was absolute and sometimes inconvenient. Demeter's fierce independence was known. Binding her daughter to the underworld might temper her. He did not consider Kore's will, nor the depth of Demeter's love. Mortal concerns, divine whims, and political maneuvering held more sway. Kore, Zeus mused, swirling the nectar in his golden cup. A radiant flower indeed. Demeter treasures her above all things. Yet, a union between life and the necessary rest that follows, it has a certain symmetry, brother. He took a long draught. Your request is bold, Hades. Demeter will rage like a wildfire denied rain. But a slow, calculating smile spread across his face. The girl is of age, and the underworld requires its queen. Very well. I give my consent. Take her, but be swift, Hades, and be prepared for the storm that follows. Hades bowed his head, a gesture of thanks that felt more like the lowering of a predator before the strike. Zeus's consent was the key, a divine sanction that overrode mortal choice or maternal fury. He didn't linger in the bright, alien halls of Olympus. The deal was struck. He returned swiftly to the depths, the cold satisfaction of acquisition warring with a strange, unfamiliar tremor of anticipation. The plan crystallized, speed and surprise were essential. He would not court, he would claim. He summoned his chariot, not a thing of gold and sun, but forged in the gloom of Tartarus, drawn by immortal, shadow-black steeds whose eyes burned with cold fire. He waited, a patient hunter, for the perfect moment when Kore, in her innocent wandering, would stray far from Demeter's immediate sight, near a place where the earth's crust yielded easily to his power. The trap was set. Above, oblivious, Kore chased a butterfly through a field of nodding asphodels, her laughter bright on the warm air, while deep below, the Lord of the Dead prepared to shatter her sunlit world. The day chosen by Hades dawned with deceptive perfection. In the Sicilian meadow near Enna, the air hung heavy and sweet with the scent of 1,000 blooming narcissus, their white and yellow heads carpeting the earth in an intoxicating display. Aelios drove his chariot high, bathing the world in a golden, drowsy light. Coan, accompanied by her constant companions, the Oceanids, was intoxicated by the sheer abundance. They had wandered far from Demeter, who was consulting with river nymphs about irrigation further north. The sense of freedom was heady. "Look," cried one Oceanid, Leus, pointing to a particularly dense cluster of narcissus near a small, clear pool fed by a trickling spring. "I've never seen them so thick. It's like a river of stars fallen to earth." "They're breathtaking," Kore sighed, her heart swelling with delight. She moved towards them, drawn by their luminous beauty. So pure, so perfect. She knelt, the soft grass yielding beneath her knees. The narcissus here were larger, more vibrant than any she'd seen before, their fragrance dizzyingly potent. Unbeknownst to her, this particular bloom was no accident of nature. Gaia, the ancient Earth Mother, acting either under subtle compulsion from Zeus or perhaps acknowledging the inevitable shift in cosmic balance, had coaxed these flowers into existence at Hades' silent request. They were bait, irresistible and enchanted. As Kore reached out to pluck one magnificent blossom, her fingers brushing the cool, waxy petals, the earth beneath her feet gave a sudden, sickening lurch. It wasn't an earthquake, but a localized, terrifying dissolution. The solid ground fractured like thin ice. A roar, not of thunder but of rending rock and displaced earth, erupted from the chasm yawning open before her. Darker than the deepest well, cold air smelling of ancient stone and damp rushed upwards, extinguishing the warmth of the day in an instant. Kore screamed, a sound of pure, primal terror that ripped through the idyllic silence. Her companions shrieked, stumbling back in horror, their faces masks of disbelief. Before Kore could scramble away, before she could even fully comprehend the horror unfolding, the chariot surged upwards from the abyss. Hades stood tall and implacable within it, clad in dark majesty, his face obscured by shadows deeper than night, only the gleam of his crown and the cold fire in his eyes visible. His black steeds, snorting plumes of dark vapor, poured the air. Time seemed to fracture. Kore saw the terror in her friend's eyes, felt the cold breath of the underworld on her skin, smelled the alien scent of deep earth and something else, the faint, metallic tang of the STYX. She tried to run, her feet slipping on the crumbling edge. "Mother!" The cry tore from her throat, raw and desperate, echoing across the suddenly silent meadow. "Demeter!" It was a plea flung towards an absent savior. Hades, swift and terrible as the closing of a tomb, leaned down. His grasp was like bands of cold iron encircling her waist. There was no gentleness, only irresistible force. He hauled her effortlessly into the chariot beside him. Kore fought, a wild thing suddenly caged, pounding her small fists against his unyielding chest plate, scratching at his arms, her screams turning ragged with terror and fury. "No! Let me go! Mother!" Her companions, paralyzed by divine terror and the sheer impossibility of the scene, could only watch, frozen statues of despair. Liu stumbled forward, hand outstretched, tears streaming down her face, but the chasm widened, pushing her back. "Kore! Kore!" Hades uttered no word. He gave no explanation, no promise, no threat. He simply gathered the reins. His whip cracked once, a sound like breaking bone, over the heads of his steeds. With a surge of terrifying power, the chariot plunged downwards, dragging the screaming, struggling Kore with it. The last the Oceanids saw was a flash of her pale, terrified face, her golden hair whipping in the wind of the descent, her hand desperately reaching back towards the vanishing light, and the hem of her bright chiton disappearing into the blackness. Then, with a groan that seemed to shake the roots of the mountains, the earth closed. The chasm sealed itself as if it had never been. Grass rushed back over the scarred ground. Wildflowers sprang up where moments before only darkness gaped. The narcissus still bloomed, innocently perfect around the pool. The sun still shone. The birds, startled into silence, cautiously resumed their songs. It was over in heartbeats. The meadow looked untouched, serene. Only the absence remained, a palpable, screaming void where Kore had stood. The Oceanids stared at the spot, their faces ashen, their earlier joy replaced by numb horror. Luce fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The others huddled together, trembling, the echo of Kore's final, desperate cry for her mother hanging in the suddenly hollow air. The idol was shattered. The bright, safe world Demeter had woven lay broken. The Lord of the Dead had claimed his prize, and the sun, witnessing it all, continued its indifferent journey across the sky. The silence that descended wasn't peaceful, it was the silence of shock, the prelude to a storm of grief that would soon engulf the world. The moment Kore's scream pierced the fabric of the world, Demeter, miles away in a verdant valley, felt it like a physical blow to her heart. A searing pain, sharper than any blade, lanced through her divine core. Her hand, gently guiding the growth of a sapling, clenched into a fist, crushing the tender shoot. The vibrant green around her seemed to dim, the cheerful chatter of the river nymphs turning into a meaningless buzz. A cold dread, utterly alien to the goddess of abundance, flooded her veins. Kore! Her name was a silent scream in Demeter's mind. "Lady Demeter," a nymph asked, her voice tentative, seeing the sudden pallor, the terror dawning in the goddess's eyes. "Are you unwell?" Demeter didn't hear her. She was already moving, a force of nature unleashed. Her form seemed to blur, the air crackling with her power. She didn't walk, she was the wind tearing across the landscape, the earthquake trembling through the roots of mountains. Trees bent as she passed, flowers withered in her wake, the very earth groaning under the weight of her sudden, all-consuming fear. She followed the fading psychic echo of her daughter's terror, a beacon leading her back to the meadow near Enna. She arrived to a scene of devastation, but not the kind wrought by storm or fire. It was the devastation of absence. The meadow was physically untouched, unnervingly beautiful, the narcissus still blooming obscenely bright around the tranquil pool. But the life, the joy, had been sucked out of it. The air was thick with the residue of terror and the chilling scent of the underworld. Her daughter's companions, the Oceanids, were huddled together like frightened sheep, their faces streaked with tears, their bodies trembling. Luce was still on her knees, her sobs the only sound breaking the dreadful silence. Demeter's presence hit them like a gale. She materialized before them, no longer the nurturing mother, but a figure of terrifying power and anguish. Her eyes, usually the warm green of new shoots, blazed with a cold, furious light. Her hair, normally crowned with wheat and poppies, streamed like dark storm clouds around a face etched with lines of primal fear. "Where is she?" The demand wasn't spoken, it was a roar that shook the ground, sent birds exploding from the trees miles away. The Oceanids flinched, shrinking back. "Kor-A, where is my daughter?" Luce, choking on her tears, managed to raise her head. "Great Demeter, it happened so fast." Her voice was a broken whisper. The earth, it opened, darkness, a chariot, horses black as night. He took her." She pointed a trembling finger at the spot where the ground had sealed itself, now covered in innocuous grass and flowers. "She screamed for you, she fought, but he was too strong, he dragged her down, into the earth. Gone, she's gone." The word he hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Only one being ruled the depths with such power, such disregard for the surface world's sanctity. Hades. The knowledge struck Demeter with the force of a thunderbolt. Her brother, the Lord of the Dead. He had stolen her light, her heart, her very reason for being. The betrayal was absolute, a violation that tore at the fabric of her being. A guttural sound, part sob, part snarl, ripped from her throat. She turned her burning gaze towards the sealed earth. Kneeling, she pressed her hands flat against the grass where Kor-A had vanished. She poured her power into the ground, not to nurture, but to demand, to compel. "Kor-A!" Her voice resonated through the bedrock, a command that should have shaken the foundations of Hades' realm. "Return to me. Hear your mother." She willed the earth to open, to yield her child. She commanded the roots to reach down and snatch her back, the stones to reject the invader. She poured her love, her fury, her desperation into the unyielding soil. Nothing. The earth remained closed, silent, indifferent. Her power, vast as it was over the living world, met an impenetrable barrier. The underworld was Hades' domain, governed by its own ancient laws, shielded from her reach. The silence that answered her command was more terrible than any refusal. It was the silence of the grave itself. Kor-A was beyond her grasp, held captive in a realm of eternal shadow. Demeter's hands clenched into fists, pulling up clods of earth and grass. The narcissus, the beautiful, treacherous flowers that had lured her daughter, withered instantly to blackened husks where her tears, hot and burning, fell upon them. She raised her face to the indifferent sky, not to Aelios who had witnessed it all, but to the heavens where her brothers ruled. A howl of pure, unadulterated grief and rage erupted from her, a sound that carried across continents, chilling the blood of every living thing that heard it. The hunt had begun. Not for prey, but for justice. For answers. For her stolen child. And the world above would pay the price until Kore was returned. Demeter's grief did not weep, it raged. It became a blight upon the world. The vibrant green meadows where Kore had danced turned sickly yellow, then brittle brown. The sturdy stalks of wheat, heavy with promise just days before, shriveled in their husks, collapsing into dust before they could ripen. Orchards laden with budding fruit saw their blossoms blacken and fall like funeral shrouds. Vines withered on their trellises. Rivers, sensing the goddess's despair, shrank into muddy trickles or vanished entirely, leaving cracked, gaping wounds in the earth. Springs turned brackish. The warm, nurturing wind that carried seeds became a biting, parched gale, scouring the land. Life retreated, burrowing deep or simply ceasing. The world plunged into an unseasonal, terrifying winter, not the gentle dormancy of snow, but the desiccating grip of famine's precursor. The sky itself seemed perpetually overcast, a grey shroud muffling the sun Helios still dutifully, if futilely, drove across. Demeter herself became a wraith upon the land. She shed her robes of verdant green and gold, donning instead the coarse, grey garb of mourning. Her luminous presence dimmed, she walked among mortals now, not as a goddess, but as a gaunt, hollow-eyed wanderer, her divine power masked by an all-consuming sorrow. She spoke to no one of her divinity. Her only mission was to find Kore, or find the truth of her fate. She traveled from village to village, city to city, her feet bare and bleeding on the hardened earth, her once bright eyes scanning every face, every shadow, hoping against impossible hope for a glimpse of her daughter, or for someone who had seen, who knew. One evening, as the perpetual twilight deepened into a starless night, she came to the well of a small, suffering village named Eleusis. The well was nearly dry, the surrounding fields dust bowls. Exhausted, her throat parched, she sank onto the worn stones surrounding the well. Her appearance was that of an old woman, bent and broken by loss and hardship. She didn't have to wait long before she was noticed. 3 young women, daughters of the local king Celius, approached with their water pitchers. Their faces, though pinched with the worry of impending famine, held a natural kindness. They saw the desolate figure by the well and exchanged concerned glances. The eldest, Calidus, spoke gently, "Grandmother, you look weary beyond measure. Are you lost? Can we bring you water?" She gestured to their meager pitchers. Demeter raised her head slowly, her eyes, ancient and filled with a sorrow that startled the girls, meeting theirs. Her voice, when she spoke, was rough with disuse and dust. "Water would be a mercy, child. My journey has been long, and the road unforgiving." She accepted a small clay cup from Calidus, sipping the tepid water slowly. The simple kindness, offered without expectation, pierced the shell of her grief momentarily. "I seek news," she rasped. "News of a young maiden, radiant as the dawn, hair like ripened wheat. Have any such passed this way? Or have you heard whispers of a girl taken?" The sisters exchanged sad looks. They knew of no such maiden in their struggling village. "No, grandmother," Calidus said softly. "We have seen no strangers lately, save those fleeing worse famine further north. Times are hard. The earth itself mourns, it seems." Her voice trembled slightly. "Our little brother, Demeter, he grows thin, the crops fail." The unspoken fear hung heavy in the air. Demeter looked at them, truly looked. She saw their fear, their kindness amidst the hardship her own grief had wrought. A spark of her old self, the nurturing goddess, flickered weakly. "You offer water to a stranger in such times," she murmured, almost to herself. "Such kindness deserves shelter." She paused, a thought forming. "Take me to your mother. Perhaps, in return for your kindness, I could serve, tend your hearth, care for the child you spoke of. I have experience with children." The words were heavy with unspoken meaning, a desperate need to connect, to nurture something in the void Kore had left. The sisters, moved by the old woman's profound sadness and sensing something deeper beneath her weathered exterior, agreed. They led her back to the modest palace of King Celeus and Queen Metanera. The royal household, though better off than the villagers, was feeling the bite of the failing world. Metanera, a woman whose own face showed the strain of worry for her people and her children, received the stranger with weary grace. Seeing the deep sorrow in the old woman's eyes, and hearing her daughter's account of her plight, Metanera's heart softened. "You are welcome here, grandmother," she said, her voice warm despite her fatigue. "Rest by our hearth. And if you wish to tend our youngest, Demeter, it would ease my heart. He is a bright spirit, but these times weigh on us all." Demeter nodded, a silent acceptance. She was given a simple pallet near the hearth. When the infant Demeter was brought to her, a plump, curious child oblivious to the world's decay, Demeter felt a fragile thread of connection. She cradled him, her touch instinctively gentle. As the firelight flickered, casting long shadows in the hall, Demeter began the slow, secret ritual. She anointed the child with ambrosia, the divine food of the gods, rubbing it into his skin each night, imparting a subtle, celestial glow. She held him over the hearth flames, not to harm, but to burn away his mortal frailty, whispering ancient words of blessing and strength, pouring into him the immortal vitality she longed to bestow upon her own lost child. In tending this mortal infant, in the simple acts of feeding and soothing, she found a temporary anchor against the yawning abyss of her grief. The fire crackled, the child gurgled, and Demeter, the broken goddess, allowed herself a moment of fragile, borrowed purpose in the quiet house of Celeus, while outside, the world she had cursed continued its slow, agonizing death. Her search was not abandoned, merely paused, gathering strength in the flickering hearthlight. The days in Eleusis passed with a strange, suspended tension for Demeter. By day, she performed the duties of the nurse, tending Demeter with a fierce, almost desperate tenderness. She fed him, bathed him, sang ancient lullabies in a voice rough with disuse but strangely soothing. The child thrived under her care, growing stronger and more vibrant by the day, a stark contrast to the wasting world outside the palace walls. His laughter, bright and clear, echoed in the halls, a sound that both pierced Demeter's heart with the memory of Kore and offered a fragile solace. At night, the secret rituals continued, the anointing with ambrosia, the gentle, purifying exposure to the sacred hearth fire. Demeter poured her divine essence into the child, willing him towards immortality, a silent defiance against the death that had claimed her daughter and now stalked the land. Queen Metanera observed the transformation in her youngest son with profound gratitude. The gaunt old woman had brought life back to her child, a miracle in these dark times. She treated Demeter with increasing respect and affection, sharing her own worries about the failing crops and the suffering people. If only the great goddess Demeter would lift her sorrow, Metanera sighed one evening, watching the nurse rock Demeter. They say she wanders the earth, grieving for a lost daughter. Her grief is our famine. She spoke unaware that the object of her speculation sat before her. Demeter remained silent, her head bowed, the irony thick and bitter. She continued her nightly vigil by the hearth. One night, driven by a desperate need to accelerate the process, to create something truly imperishable in this world of decay, she placed the sleeping Demophan directly into the heart of the flames. The sacred fire licked around him, not burning, but glowing with an intense, golden light, burning away the last vestiges of his mortality. It was a moment of profound, dangerous magic. It was at this precise moment that Queen Metanera, unable to sleep, decided to check on her son. She crept silently into the hall, drawn by an unusual warmth and a faint, unearthly radiance emanating from the hearth. What she saw froze her blood, her beloved child seemingly engulfed in roaring flames, held calmly by the old nurse who watched with an expression of intense concentration, not horror. "My son!" Metanera's scream shattered the stillness, a sound of pure maternal terror. She lunged forward, blind with panic, snatching Demophan from the fire before Demeter could react or explain. "You monster! What are you doing? You would burn him alive." She clutched the crying child to her breast, frantically checking for burns. Finding none, only a strange warmth and radiance clinging to his skin, did her terror momentarily falter, replaced by bewildered shock. The interruption was catastrophic. The sacred spell shattered like glass. The divine energy Demeter had channeled recoiled violently. The protective glow surrounding Demophan flickered and died. The ambrosia's effect ceased. He remained a healthy, beloved mortal child, but the path to immortality was irrevocably severed. Demeter rose to her full height. The air crackled. The guise of the old woman melted away like mist before the sun. Gray rags transformed into robes shimmering with the suppressed power of the earth. Her gauntness filled out, her eyes blazed with divine fury and profound, wounded sorrow. A terrifying aura of power filled the hall, pressing down on Metanera, who stumbled back, eyes wide with dawning, horrified recognition. The infant Demophan wailed in her arms, sensing the sudden, overwhelming presence. "Foolish woman!" Demeter's voice was no longer rough, but resonant, echoing with the force of earthquakes and the howl of barren winds. It filled the palace, shaking the timbers. "You have destroyed what could have been eternal. In your blind fear, you snatched your son from immortality. I sought to make him deathless, ageless, a god among mortals, in return for your pitiful kindness. I, Demeter, would have granted him the boon you mortals dream of." Metanera fell to her knees, trembling violently, clutching her son. "Great goddess, forgive me. I didn't know. I thought. I saw fire." She bowed her head, tears of terror and regret streaming down her face. Demeter looked down at her, the fury warring with the crushing weight of her own loss. The brief, fragile connection, the purpose she had found in tending this child, was broken. It mirrored the larger fracture in her world. "Your ignorance has cost him divinity," Demeter declared, her voice colder now, the fury subsiding into bleak despair. "He will live, Metanera. He will be strong, wise, perhaps even a great king. Mortals will sing his name. But he will age. He will die. The gift I offered is withdrawn." She turned her gaze away from the weeping queen and the bewildered child, looking towards the palace doors, towards the desolate world beyond. "My sorrow remains. The earth will remain barren until my daughter, Koi, stolen by Hades and held against her will in the sunless depths, is returned to me. This is not my curse upon you, woman, but the consequence of a greater theft." Her form began to glow with an intense, sorrowful light. "Eleusis showed me kindness. Remember that." When the light returns, seek me here. I will show you something of the mysteries." It was a cryptic promise, heavy with future significance. Then, in a flash of light that momentarily blinded Metanera and illuminated the entire hall with the ghost of lost spring, Demeter vanished. She left behind a terrified queen, a crying child, and the heavy scent of scorched earth and divine wrath. Her brief sanctuary was over. The hunt resumed, fiercer and more desperate than before. The world's famine deepened. Demeter's departure from Eleusis wasn't retreat, it was the gathering of a storm. The encounter, while ending in failure for Demophane's immortality, had served a purpose. It had rekindled her rage, stripping away the numbing grief that had cloaked her in Eleusis. She was Demeter, Olympian, sister to Zeus and Hades, Potnia, the mistress. She would not skulk in disguise any longer. Her daughter had been stolen with the tacit approval, perhaps even the orchestration, of Olympus itself. It was time to confront the source. She ascended, not with the gentle grace of a supplicant, but with the terrifying force of a natural disaster given divine form. The air cracked around her as she breached the cloud barriers of Olympus. The usual sounds of divine revelry, lyre music, laughter, the clatter of golden cups, died instantly as she materialized in the grand Megaron. The assembled gods froze. Zeus, lounging on his throne, looked up, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to wary surprise at the sight of his sister. She was gaunt, yes, her divine radiance dimmed by sorrow, but her eyes burned with a cold fire that promised retribution. The scent of dust and decay clung to her, an affront to the eternal ambrosial fragrance of the court. "Brother!" Her voice cut through the stunned silence, cold and sharp as an ice shard. She didn't bow. She didn't offer pleasantries. She stood before his throne, a figure of accusation. "Look upon your handiwork." She gestured vaguely downwards, encompassing the blighted world. "Look upon the dying earth, the starving mortals, the silence where life once sang. This is the tapestry you wove when you gave your consent." Zeus shifted, his brow furrowing. "Sister," he began, his voice attempting its usual booming authority but lacking conviction. "Your grief clouds your judgment. Hades came to me as a brother in need. His realm is vast, lonely. He desired a queen. Koe is of age. It is a suitable match, binding the realms." A suitable match. Demeter's roar echoed off the marble pillars. "You speak of suitability? Did you ask her? Did you ask me? Or did you trade my daughter, my joy, my very heart, like a piece of ambrosia at your feast?" She took a step forward, the floor trembling beneath her feet. "He stole her, Zeus. He tore her from a sunlit meadow while she gathered flowers. She screamed for me. She fought him. Is that your idea of a courtship? Is that the foundation for a binding of realms?" Her voice cracked, raw with the memory of Kore's terror. "You gave her to the Lord of Shadows without a thought. You condemned her to an eternity in that sunless tomb." The other gods exchanged uneasy glances. Hera looked away, her expression unreadable. Poseidon studied the floor. Apollo plucked a nervous chord on his lyre. The carefree atmosphere was utterly shattered. Demeter's anguish was a palpable force, her fury terrifying in its focus. Zeus held up a hand, attempting to placate. "Demeter, be reasonable. Hades is a powerful god, a king. He will treat her with honor." "Honor!" Demeter spat the word. What honor is there in abduction? What honor in dragging a terrified maiden into perpetual night? She belongs to the light, Zeus. To the green growing things, to the warmth of the sun. not to the cold silence of the dead. She drew herself up, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper that carried further than any shout. Hear me, brother king. Hear me well. Until my daughter is returned to me, whole and unharmed, the earth will know no seed, no root, no fruit. The plough will break on barren soil. The rivers will run dry. Mortals will perish, their prayers turning to curses upon your name. And when the last mortal starves, and the last altar fire gutters out, Olympus itself will feel the cold of my grief. I will let the world die, Zeus. I will let it turn to dust and ash. And Hades' kingdom will swell with the dead until it bursts, but he will not keep my daughter. The threat hung in the air, absolute and chilling. This was no tantrum. This was the declaration of a fundamental power. Life itself was withdrawing its consent. Without Demeter's blessing, the cycle ceased. Zeus saw it in her eyes, the terrifying resolve. He saw the truth of the dying world below. He saw the unease, even fear, on the faces of the other gods. Mortals were their sustenance, their audience, their playthings. A world without them was a dim, hollow existence, even for immortals. His political maneuvering had unleashed a force far more dangerous than Hades' loneliness. He had underestimated Demeter's love and her power. Zeus leaned back, his face grave. The jovial king was gone, the calculating ruler remained. He could command her? Perhaps. But Demeter's power was rooted in the earth itself, older and more fundamental than his skyborn authority in some ways. A direct clash could shatter the world. And her grief made her unpredictable, potentially uncontrollable. You leave me little choice, sister, he said, his voice heavy. Your grief and your wrath are undeniable. The suffering below cannot be ignored. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But understand this, Hades acted with my consent. He is a god, and Kore is now his wife, queen of the underworld. She cannot simply be snatched back without consequence. The laws of hospitality, of marriage, bind even us. He held up a hand as Demeter's eyes blazed anew. However, if Kore herself has not partaken of the food of the dead, if she remains untouched by the substance of that realm, then perhaps, by the oldest laws, her ties are not yet irrevocable. Perhaps she can return. Demeter's breath caught. A flicker of desperate hope, fragile as a snowdrop in frost, pierced her rage. She would not eat there, she whispered fiercely. She knows the stories. She knows the laws. She would starve before binding herself to that place. Zeus nodded slowly. Then there is a path. But it must be verified. It must be Kore's own state that decides it. I will send Hermes, the swift messenger, down to Hades' realm. He will ascertain the truth. He will see Kore, speak with her, learn if she has eaten. If she has not, then I will command Hades to release her. He met Demeter's burning gaze. This is the only way, Demeter. The only way that does not shatter the order of all things. Do you accept this? Demeter stood silent for a long moment, the weight of the world pressing down on her. It was a concession, a gamble. But it was hope. Real hope. She had forced Zeus's hand. She had made the king of the gods acknowledge the wrong. Now, everything hinged on one thing, Kore's choice in the face of despair. Had she eaten? Demeter clung to the image of her strong-willed daughter. She would not. She nodded once, a sharp, jerky movement. Send Hermes. Now. Every moment she spends in that gloom is an eternity of torment. She turned, her form already shimmering with the need to return to the dying earth, to wait, to hope. But know this, Zeus. If Hermes returns with anything less than my daughter walking beside him, my curse stands. The world dies." With that final, chilling pronouncement, she vanished, leaving the halls of Olympus steeped in an uneasy silence far deeper than before. The descent was an assault on the senses. Hermes, the nimble psychopomp, guided his soul light through layers of increasing chill and silence. The vibrant colors of the upper world faded to gray, then to shades of obsidian and ash. The cheerful chirp of insects was replaced by the mournful drip of water in unseen caverns, the distant, hollow sighs of countless shades. The air grew thick and still, smelling of wet stone, ancient dust, and something else, the faint, metallic tang of the river Styx. His winged sandals felt heavy on the strangely resonant rock. Even for the messenger of the gods, accustomed to traversing boundaries, the underworld's oppressive weight was palpable. He followed the well-trodden path of the dead, past the gaping maw of Akron, where Charon, the ancient ferryman, poled his spectral barge laden with silent, grey figures across the inky water. Hermes passed with a nod, his divine authority granting him passage where coin was required for mortals. He traversed the fields of Asphodel, a vast, grey, twilit plain where the shades of ordinary mortals drifted like smoke, their features blurred, their memories faint echoes. Their whispers were a susurrus of forgotten regrets and extinguished passions. Further on, the landscape grew harsher. He skirted Tartarus, a yawning chasm deeper than despair, from which emanated groans of the truly damned and the faint, chilling clang of infernal metal. Finally, he approached Erebus, the heart of Hades' domain. The darkness here was absolute, yet pierced by the cold, phosphorescent glow of embedded gems and the flickering soul lights of the more fortunate dead. The silence was profound, a physical presence. Hades' palace rose before him, carved from the living rock of the abyss. It wasn't ornate in the Olympian sense, but possessed a stark, terrifying grandeur. Towers like shattered teeth pierced the gloom. Gates of black adamantine stood open, flanked by silent, watchful spirits. Hermes passed through, his footsteps echoing in cavernous halls lit by braziers of cold, blue flame. The air was still, heavy with the gravity of eternity. Shades glided soundlessly, performing tasks as eternal as their existence, polishing already spotless obsidian, tending ghostly gardens of stone flowers. The only sound beyond Hermes' steps was the distant, rhythmic drip of water and the low, resonant hum of the earth's deepest bones. He was ushered into the great throne room. Hades sat upon a dais carved from a single, massive piece of jet-black stone. He was larger, more imposing than Hermes remembered, clad in robes the color of a starless night, his face stern and impassive, crowned with the jagged circlet of his office. Beside him, on a slightly smaller throne of dark, polished basalt, sat a figure that made Hermes pause. Koe, or rather, Persephone. She was changed. Draped in rich, deep purple robes that seemed woven from twilight itself, her once sunbright hair was bound in intricate braids, adorned with jewels like frozen tears. Her face was pale, startlingly beautiful, but etched with a stillness that hadn't been there before. Her eyes, when they met Hermes, held a profound weariness, a depth of experience that belonged to someone far older. Yet, beneath the regal facade and the sorrow, Hermes saw a flicker of recognition, a spark of the Koe he knew. She sat straight, her hands folded in her lap, every inch the queen of the dead, but the tension in her posture spoke volumes. Hermes, Hades' voice rumbled through the chamber, deep and resonant as shifting tectonic plates. Son of Zeus, what brings the swift messenger to this sunless realm? Does Olympus finally deign to acknowledge its shadow? Hermes bowed, a gesture of respect but not submission. Lord Hades, he replied, his voice clear and carrying despite the oppressive silence. "Queen Persephone." He nodded to her, seeing her flinch almost imperceptibly at the name. "I come bearing a message from Zeus, king of Olympus, and a plea from the lady Demeter." Hade's expression remained impassive, but a cold intensity sharpened his gaze. Persephone's hands tightened slightly in her lap, her knuckles whitening. She leaned forward, just a fraction, her eyes fixed on Hermes with desperate intensity. "My mother!" Her voice, when she spoke, was lower, huskier than Kore's bright tones, but the yearning was unmistakable. How does she fare?" "The world fares ill, Queen," Hermes said, his gaze encompassing both thrones but his words directed at her. "Demeter's grief is a plague upon the earth. No seed sprouts, no fruit ripens. Mortals starve by the thousands. Their cries reach even the heights of Olympus. She has sworn to let the world wither to dust and ash unless." He paused, letting the weight of the suffering sink in. "Unless her daughter is returned to her." Persephone gasped, a small, choked sound. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "No, the mortals, the green things." The images of the dying world, the suffering she had unwittingly caused, clearly struck her with the force of a physical blow. The mantle of queen seemed to slip for a moment, revealing the terrified, heartsick girl beneath. "Mother!" Hade stirred, a low growl emanating from him. "Returned?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "She is my queen, taken with Zeus's own consent. This realm is her home now. Demeter's grief does not override divine law, nor the vows of this throne." "Zeus acknowledges his consent, Lord Hades," Hermes said smoothly, meeting the god's cold gaze. "But he also acknowledges the manner of the taking has caused great anguish. And there is the matter of the ancient laws." He turned his full attention back to Persephone. "Queen Persephone, the decree of Zeus hinges on one thing, your own state. Did you partake of the food of this realm? Have you consumed anything, even a single seed, offered to you in the underworld?" The question hung in the air, thick and vital. Persephone froze. Her eyes darted, for the briefest instant, towards Hades, then back to Hermes. A complex storm of emotions raged across her face: fear, shame, despair, and a dawning, terrible realization. The silence stretched, broken only by the eternal drip of water somewhere in the palace depths. Hermes watched her, the fate of the world resting on her answer, on the truth of a single, seemingly insignificant act in the depths of her despair. The Queen of the Dead closed her eyes for a moment, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. When she opened them, they held a bleak, resigned truth. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, told Hermes everything he needed to know, and more than Persephone had perhaps allowed herself to fully acknowledge until this very moment. The spark of hope Hermes carried flickered, threatened by the cold reality of the underworld's grasp. The silence after Hermes' question was profound, thicker than the darkness of Erebus itself. Persephone looked down at her hands, clenched tightly in the rich purple fabric of her gown. The memory flooded back, vivid and sharp against the eternal gray of her surroundings. The early days in the underworld had been a waking nightmare. Hades, while not cruel, was distant, consumed by the vast, unending duties of his realm. He had presented her with the crown, the robes, the title, Queen Persephone. It felt like a mockery. He offered her every comfort the sunless kingdom could provide: gardens of ghostly silver flowers that emitted their own cold light, chambers adorned with gems that pulsed with internal fire, attendants who moved with silent efficiency. But it was all ash in her mouth. She was given freedom within the palace and its grounds, a gilded cage whose bars were the sheer, impenetrable weight of the earth above and the silent, watching dead. The oppressive stillness, the absence of birdsong, the lack of the sun's warmth on her skin, it was a constant, gnawing torture. She wept until her eyes were raw, called for her mother until her voice was hoarse, paced her chambers like a trapped animal. Hades observed her grief with a strange, unsettling mixture of patience and possession. He seemed to believe time would reconcile her to her new role, that the grandeur of her station would eventually eclipse the loss of the sun. Hunger, a purely mortal sensation she hadn't truly known as a goddess, became a constant companion. Not just the hunger for food, but the devastating, soul-crushing hunger for light, for life, for her mother's touch. The underworld offered sustenance, food grown in its lightless gardens, fruits that looked plump but tasted of dust, bread that crumbled to ash on the tongue. She refused it all. She knew the stories, whispered by nymphs on warm summer evenings. Partake of the food of the dead, and you bind yourself to their realm forever. It was her only weapon, her only hope. She would starve, waste away, become a shade herself before she willingly tethered her spirit to this place of eternal twilight. Her refusal was absolute, a silent rebellion. Days bled into an indistinguishable haze of gray. Weakness began to seep into her limbs. The vibrant energy that had defined Kore was leaching away, replaced by a leaden fatigue. The cold of the underworld, previously just uncomfortable, now seemed to penetrate her bones. The silence pressed in, heavier, more suffocating. Hope, that fragile flame, flickered dangerously low. Was her mother even searching? Could anyone breach this deep, silent fortress? Despair, cold and insidious, began to coil around her heart. One day, deeper into her imprisonment than she could measure, she wandered the palace gardens, a place of unnerving beauty. Luminescent fungi glowed on dead branches, stone lilies bloomed in eternal stillness. She sank onto a cold obsidian bench, her strength failing. The effort of simply breathing felt immense. The gnawing emptiness inside was a physical pain now, a yawning void that threatened to consume her. She closed her eyes, tears leaking silently down her cheeks. "Mother, I am so cold, so tired." It was then that he approached. Ascalaphus, the gardener of Hades, a figure usually silent and unobtrusive among the ghostly blooms. He was an underworld spirit, his form shifting slightly at the edges, his eyes holding an ancient, knowing light. In his gnarled hand, he held a small, ornate silver dish. On it rested a fruit unlike any other in the garden. It was a pomegranate, but impossibly vibrant. Its skin was a deep, bloody crimson, gleaming as if polished. It seemed to pulse with a faint internal warmth, a shocking note of life in the monochrome gloom. It smelled divine, not of dust or stone, but of sun-warmed earth, of orchards in high summer, a scent so achingly familiar it tore a sob from Persephone's throat. "Great Queen," Ascalaphus murmured, his voice like dry leaves rustling. His gaze was inscrutable. "You fade. The Lord Hades grieves your suffering, though he does not speak it. This fruit is special, grown near the roots of the world tree. It holds the essence of life, even here. Please, take sustenance. A few seeds only, enough to restore your strength." What harm could a few seeds do? He extended the dish towards her. Persephone stared at the pomegranate. It was a trick. It had to be. But the scent, it was the scent of home, of sunlight, of her mother's arms. The hunger roared within her, a beast unleashed. The relentless cold, the crushing despair, the sheer, overwhelming fatigue, they coalesced into a wave of weakness that threatened to drown her. Her vision swam. Just a few seeds. The voice in her head wasn't Ascalaphus's, it was the voice of her own unraveling resolve. Just enough to stop the shaking, the cold. Mother would understand. She wouldn't want me to perish. Just a taste. The logic of despair was seductive, overpowering. Her hand, trembling violently, reached out. Her fingers, cold and stiff, brushed the cool, firm skin of the fruit. The scent intensified, a siren song of life. With a sob that was equal parts shame and desperate need, she tore the pomegranate apart. The ruby seeds glistened like jewels, like drops of blood against the pale flesh. She raised a cluster of them to her lips. They burst against her tongue, sweet, achingly sweet, cool, flooding her mouth with a flavor that was pure, concentrated vitality. It was ambrosia and poison combined. She swallowed 6 seeds. The number burned itself into her mind even as the life-giving warmth spread through her chilled body, momentarily banishing the weakness, the despair. It felt like a small sun igniting within her chest. Then, the horror crashed down. She dropped the remaining fruit, the seeds scattering like dark gems on the obsidian path. She stared at her sticky fingers, the crimson juice like blood on her skin. What have I done? The realization was a cold knife plunging into the brief warmth. The stories echoed in her mind. Partake of the food, bind yourself forever. She had eaten. She had consumed the substance of the underworld. She was bound. The fragile hope of return snapped. A cry, raw and anguished, tore from her lips as she sank to her knees amidst the scattered seeds, the vibrant red a cruel mockery of her doomed defiance. Ascalaphus watched, his expression unreadable, then silently faded back into the shadows of the stone garden, leaving the Queen of the Dead alone with her devastating, irreversible choice. The memory of the pomegranate seeds, their sickly sweet taste turning to ash in her mouth, crashed over Persephone as she sat on the basalt throne. Hermes' question, "Did you partake?" hung in the air, a blade poised over the thread of her hope. She felt Hades' gaze upon her, heavy and expectant. He knew. Of course he knew. Ascalaphus reported to him. The pomegranate hadn't been chance. It had been opportunity presented, temptation offered, a test she had failed. Had he orchestrated it? Or had her own despair played perfectly into his hands? The thought sent a fresh wave of shame and anger through her. She lifted her head, meeting Hermes' eyes. Her own were filled with a complex storm, despair, yes, but also a dawning fury, not just at Hades, but at herself. I. Her voice caught, rough with unshed tears. She cleared her throat, forcing the words out, each one heavy as stone. I ate Hermes. The admission was a defeat. In my despair, my weakness, I consumed 6 seeds of a pomegranate. Offered, here. She couldn't bring herself to look at Hades, but she felt the subtle shift in his posture, a quiet satisfaction radiating from him. Hermes' face fell, his usual nimble composure slipping for a moment. 6 seeds. He murmured, the implications clear. The ancient laws were absolute. Consumption of the food of a realm created an irrevocable bond. Persephone was tied to the underworld, body and spirit. Zeus's condition for her release was shattered. Hades spoke, his voice resonating with a newfound, grim certainty. You hear, messenger? My queen has partaken of the bounty of her own realm. She has bound herself to this place, to me, by the oldest of divine laws. She is no longer Kore of the upper world, she is Persephone, queen of the dead. Her place is here. Demeter's grief, however profound, cannot break laws older than Olympus itself. He placed a hand, possessive and final, on the arm of Persephone's throne. She flinched but didn't pull away, trapped by the weight of her own action. Hermes recovered his diplomatic poise, though his expression remained troubled. The law is clear, Lord Hades, he acknowledged. But so is the suffering above. Zeus commands a resolution. The world cannot endure Demeter's wrath indefinitely. There must be a balance. Balance! Persephone found her voice again, sharper now, edged with the anger that was burning through her despair. She turned her gaze fully on Hades for the first time since Hermes arrived. Where was balance when you tore me from the light? Where was law when you stole me without a word, without consent? You speak of bonds forged by seeds, but what of the bonds shattered by force? Her voice rose, echoing in the cavernous hall. You took me, Hades. You ripped me from my mother, from the sun, from everything I knew and loved. And now you hide behind laws I broke in a moment of utter desolation? Laws you knew would bind me? The accusation hung heavy, challenging his claim of honor. She saw a flicker in his impassive eyes, not guilt, perhaps, but a recognition of the truth in her words, the violence underlying his possession. Hades met her gaze, his own dark and unyielding. You are queen here, Persephone. This realm needs your light. I needed your presence. The manner was abrupt, but the result stands. The seeds are eaten. The bond is forged. Hermes stepped forward, sensing the dangerous impasse. Lord Hades, Queen Persephone, he interjected, his tone conciliatory but firm. Zeus seeks not to overturn the law, but to find equity within it. The queen has consumed food of the underworld, 6 seeds. The bond is real, undeniable. But the suffering above, caused by her absence, is also undeniable. Perhaps the bond can be measured? 6 seeds, not the fullness of the realm's bounty, but a portion. He paused, letting the idea take root. Hades' brow furrowed slightly. Persephone held her breath, a fragile, desperate hope rekindling. Zeus proposes, Hermes continued carefully, that Queen Persephone's time be divided. 4 each seed consumed, a month spent below, fulfilling her duties as queen, honoring the bond she has formed. But for the remaining months, she would return to the upper world, to her mother, to the light and life that are her birthright. 6 months here, 6 months above. An eternal cycle, reflecting the bond and the release. The proposal hung in the air. Persephone felt a dizzying surge of emotion, relief warring with dread. 6 months of gloom, but 6 months of light. 6 months away from Hades, but 6 months bound to return. It wasn't freedom, but it was reprieve. It was life, however halved. Hades was silent, his face a mask. He looked at Persephone, seeing the desperate hope warring with resignation in her eyes. He saw the unyielding fury of Demeter, a force that could indeed destroy the world he ruled part of. He saw the practicality of Zeus's solution. Denying it meant perpetual conflict, Demeter's unending curse, and Persephone's eternal, embittered captivity. Accepting meant sharing, losing her for half of eternity, but gaining her presence, her light, her acknowledged role as queen for the other half. It was compromise, forced upon him. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, each word measured. 6 seeds, 6 months. He looked at Persephone, his gaze intense, inscrutable. You would return. Each year. You would be queen, in truth, for your time below. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a demand for her acceptance of the role, not just the place. Persephone met his gaze. 6 months of darkness. 6 months of light. It was a prison sentence and a reprieve. It acknowledged her bond, born of despair and trickery, but also affirmed her connection to the world above. She thought of her mother's grief, of the dying earth, of the scent of sun-warmed soil. She thought of the crushing silence of Erebus, the weight of the crown. She had no choice, really. But within the constraint, she saw a sliver of agency. She would be queen, yes. But on her own terms? Perhaps. And she would see the sun again. She nodded once, slowly, a movement heavy with acceptance and the first fragile stirrings of a future defined by duality. I accept, she whispered, the words tasting strange, binding her to the cycle. The deal was struck, not in joy, but in the grim necessity forged by stolen seeds and a mother's immeasurable love. The world held its breath. The journey upwards was a reversal of Persephone's descent, a passage from profound silence into burgeoning sound, from eternal twilight into the painful, glorious assault of sunlight. Hermes guided her, his presence a steady reassurance. As they ascended through layers of rock and soil, the oppressive weight of the underworld lessened. The air grew warmer, carrying faint, unfamiliar scents, dust, vegetation, the distant tang of the sea. Sounds filtered down, the rustle of wind through leaves, the tentative chirp of a bird, the sigh of the earth itself, groaning as if awakening from a long, troubled sleep. Persephone shielded her eyes as they finally breached the surface near Eleusis. The light, even filtered through the grey, heavy sky of Demeter's grief, was blinding after the perpetual gloom. She stumbled, her legs weak, not just from the journey, but from the overwhelming sensory flood. She breathed deeply, the air tasting thin, cold, and strangely lifeless compared to the rich, loamy stillness below, yet infinitely precious. She looked around. The world she remembered, vibrant meadows, lush forests, was gone, replaced by a desolate landscape of skeletal trees, frozen, cracked earth, and a silence broken only by the mournful wind. It was a physical manifestation of her mother's pain, and the sight tore at her heart. "Mother!" she whispered, the word catching in her throat. Demeter felt her daughter's return like the first tremor before an earthquake. She was standing on a barren hilltop, her grey robes whipping around her in the cold wind, her gaze fixed on the dead horizon. Then, a jolt, pure and electric, shot through her core. "Koe!" She turned, a movement of desperate hope, and saw them, Hermes, and beside him, a figure draped in deep purple, pale but unmistakably her child. The grey shroud that had enveloped her mind and heart for months ripped apart. "Koe!" The cry was a sob, a roar, a release of pent-up agony. Demeter moved not with divine speed, but with the frantic energy of a mother whose child has been lost and found. She covered the distance between them in moments, stumbling on the rough ground, her arms outstretched. She reached Persephone and pulled her into an embrace so fierce it lifted the younger goddess off her feet. She buried her face in her daughter's hair, now smelling faintly of cold stone and pomegranate, but still underneath, like sunshine on wheat. She wept uncontrollably, great, shuddering sobs that shook both their bodies. "My child, my light, my heart, you're home, you're home." Persephone clung to her mother with equal desperation, tears streaming down her own face. She inhaled the familiar scent of Demeter, warm earth, growing things, sunshine, a scent that had been a phantom memory in the underworld. "Mother, I'm here, I'm here." She choked out, the words muffled against Demeter's shoulder. The relief, the sheer physical reality of her mother's arms after the cold isolation of Hades' realm was overwhelming. For long moments, they simply held each other, rocking slightly, oblivious to Hermes, to the dead world around them, lost in the primal reunion. Demeter finally pulled back slightly, her hands cradling Persephone's face, scanning every feature. Her eyes, shadowed but still her own, the line of her jaw, the curve of her cheek. She saw the paleness, the new gravity in her daughter's gaze, the subtle shift from Kore to Persephone. But she was alive. She was here. "He took you," Demeter whispered, her voice raw. "He stole you. I searched. I called." "I know, Mother," Persephone whispered back, fresh tears welling. "I heard you. I called for you, in the meadow." The shared memory of that moment of terror hung between them. Demeter's expression hardened as she remembered the terms. She looked over Persephone's shoulder at Hermes, who stood respectfully apart. "The seeds," she demanded, her voice regaining some of its steel. "She ate." Hermes stepped forward, his expression solemn. "She did, Lady Demeter. 6 seeds of the pomegranate, consumed in the underworld, by the ancient laws." Demeter's face contorted with fury and anguish. She clutched Persephone tighter. 6 seeds, taken in despair, tricked, no doubt. It doesn't bind her. It cannot. "It does bind her, Mother," Persephone said softly, pulling back to look into Demeter's eyes. She saw the denial, the rage, the refusal to accept any loss. "I ate them. I knew the risk. I was weak." Shame colored her voice. But Hermes brought a resolution. "Zeus decreed it." Hermes nodded. "Zeus commands that the bond be honored, but also that the suffering above be ended. For each seed consumed, 1 month must Persephone reign as queen beside Lord Hades in the underworld. For the remaining 6 months of the year, she is free to return to you, to the light and life of the upper world." Demeter stared at him, then at Persephone. 6 months. Half of her daughter's life. Condemned to that sunless pit. The fury surged again, hot and blinding. "No! It is not enough. She was stolen. Tricked into eating. She belongs here. Entirely. Unbound." She rounded on the spot where they stood, as if Hades himself were present. "He will not have her. Not for a single day." Persephone placed a gentle hand on her mother's arm. "Mother, please." Her voice, though soft, carried a new authority, a depth born of experience Demeter didn't yet understand. "Listen. It is a bond. I broke the law of return. But this is life. 6 months of sun, of green things, of you. It is more than I dared hope for in the depths." She looked around at the dead world. "And look what your grief has wrought. The mortals suffer. The world dies. Because of me. Because of my absence." Her voice broke. "I cannot bear that weight, Mother. Not for eternity. Let me return for half the year. Let me bring the spring back. Let me live." Demeter looked into her daughter's eyes, no longer just the eyes of her innocent Kore, but eyes that had seen the abyss, eyes that held sorrow and wisdom alongside the familiar love. She saw the plea, the acceptance of a harsh reality, the desire to heal the world her abduction had broken. The fight drained out of Demeter, replaced by a profound, aching weariness and a dawning understanding. Her daughter had changed. She had faced darkness and emerged, not unscathed, but transformed. To demand all of her back was to deny the part of her that now belonged to the shadows, forged by experience and irrevocable choice. The mother's heart raged against the compromise, but the goddess understood necessity and the greater love that demanded life for the world. With a shuddering sigh that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself, Demeter pulled Persephone close again, burying her face in her hair. 6 months, she whispered, the words a surrender and a vow. You will always return. Always. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the barren land. A single tear, warm and golden, fell from her eye and struck the frozen earth at their feet. Where it landed, a single, brave green shoot pushed through the crust of ice, reaching towards the heavy, gray sky. The long winter was ending. The touch of Demeter's tear was the spark that ignited the world. The tiny green shoot near Eleusis was the first herald, a defiant emerald flag against the gray. Then, like a sigh of release held for too long, life surged back. It began subtly, a softening of the biting wind, a faint, moist warmth replacing the killing frost in the air. Then, visible miracles unfolded. From the barren branches of skeletal trees, tiny buds, tightly furled fists of green and russet, began to swell and burst. Tender blades of grass, impossibly vibrant, pierced the iron-hard earth, first in patches, then spreading like spilled paint across the hillsides. Frozen streams groaned, cracked, and began to sing again, their icy shackles melting into clear, rushing water that carried the promise of renewal downstream. Demeter, still holding Persephone, felt the change vibrate through her own being. It was a reawakening, a reconnect ion to the source of her power. She closed her eyes, extending her senses. Deep in the frozen ground, seeds that had lain dormant, preserved by the very cold that threatened them, stirred. Roots, half dead, sent tentative threads seeking moisture. The earth itself seemed to exhale, a warm breath rising to meet the tentative sun. She opened her eyes, looking at her daughter, and for the first time in months, a true, if weary, smile touched her lips. Feel it, Kauai? The earth remembers. It answers. Persephone breathed deeply. The scent was different now, wet soil, decaying leaves giving way to new growth, the faint, sweet promise of blossoms yet to come. It was the scent of home, intensified by absence. A fragile joy, tentative as the first buds, bloomed in her own heart. I feel it, Mother. She knelt, touching the cool, damp earth. It felt alive beneath her fingertips, humming with potential. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, the first since her return. It remembers. The news, carried by the warming wind and the suddenly chattering birds, spread faster than fire. Mortals, huddled in their cold, dark dwellings, starving and despairing, felt the change in the air. They ventured out, blinking in the unfamiliar brightness. They saw the green creeping over the hills. They saw the buds on the trees. They felt the sun, weak but undeniably warmer, on their faces. A sound rose, hesitant at first, then swelling, a sound not heard for months, hope. It was in the cries of children pointing at the first crocus pushing through snowmelt, in the tears of farmers kneeling to touch the softening earth, in the songs lifted towards the clearing sky. The great famine was broken. Spring, tentative but undeniable, had come. Demeter led Persephone back towards the palace of Celeus in Eleusis. The journey was a revelation. Where days before had been only dust and death, now life erupted with frantic energy. Wildflowers, snowdrops, violets, bright yellow aconites, dotted the meadows. Birdsong filled the air, a joyous cacophony. The trees seemed to stretch their limbs towards the sun. People emerged from their homes, thin faces turned upwards, tears of relief streaming down gaunt cheeks. They saw the two goddesses walking, the Lady of the Harvest, radiant once more, her grey robes seeming to shimmer with verdant light, and beside her, the maiden returned, her step lighter, her face turned towards the sun, though a shadow of her ordeal lingered in her eyes. King Celeus and Queen Metanera rushed out to meet them. Metanera fell to her knees, weeping with gratitude and shame. "Great Demeter, forgive my ignorance, my fear. You blessed our house, and I repaid you with distrust." Celeus bowed deeply, his face etched with the strain of the famine but now alight with relief. Demeter raised Metanera up. "Your fear was human, Queen. The fault was not yours, but that of greater powers who played games with mortal lives." Her gaze swept over Eleusis, seeing the green returning, the people stirring with newfound hope. "You offered shelter to a stranger in the darkest hour. Eleusis showed kindness. For that, I will not forget." She looked at Persephone, then back at the royal family and the gathering villagers. Her voice, amplified by her power, carried across the awakening land. "Here, in Eleusis, where hope was offered and life returns, I will establish my mysteries. Sacred rites, performed in secret, that will teach of life, death, and rebirth. Of loss endured and joy regained. Of the bond between mother and daughter, and the eternal cycle that governs all things." It was a promise, cryptic but profound, of a deeper understanding to be found in this place of reunion. Persephone stood beside her mother, absorbing the scene. The joy was palpable, infectious. Yet, within her, alongside the relief and the love for her mother, stirred other feelings. A strange sense of dislocation. The vibrant green, the blinding sun, the cacophony of life, it was overwhelming after the profound silence and subtle, phosphorescent beauty of the underworld. She thought of the stark grandeur of Hades' halls, the quiet dignity of the shades in Asphodel, the strange, silver gardens. She thought of the weight of the crown, the responsibility she had only begun to grasp. She was Persephone now, queen as well as maiden. The carefree Kore was gone, replaced by a being who bridged two worlds. As the days passed and spring blossomed into full, riotous life, Persephone walked the reborn earth with Demeter. They tended the burgeoning crops together, Demeter's touch making vines heavy with grapes overnight, orchards explode into fragrant blossom. Persephone learned anew the secrets of seed and shoot, the language of the turning earth. But she also spoke, haltingly at first, then with increasing clarity, of her time below. Not just the terror and the despair, but the realm itself, its order, its necessity, its strange, somber beauty. She spoke of Hecate, the ancient titan of crossroads and magic, who had become a silent, watchful presence and perhaps a reluctant guide. She spoke of the shades, not as frightening phantoms, but as souls in transition, carrying their stories. She did not speak of Hades with affection, but her initial terror had tempered into a complex understanding of his isolation and his relentless duty. Demeter listened, her heart aching, but also marveling at the depth in her daughter. She saw the wisdom forged in darkness, the compassion born of experiencing both light and shadow. The girl who had known only sunshine now understood the cycle in its entirety. The grief remained, a mother's grief for the innocence lost, but it was joined by a dawning respect for the powerful, dual-natured goddess her daughter had become. The carefree Kore danced in the meadow still, but beside her walked Persephone, queen of the necessary dark, her steps measured, her eyes holding secrets of the deep earth. Spring celebrated the return of the maiden, but the seeds of the harvest and the knowledge of the winter to come were already present in the vibrant green world. The cycle had begun. The summer sun blazed high over Eleusis, baking the fields into carpets of gold. Wheat stood tall and heavy, grapes swelled purple on the vines, orchards groaned under the weight of ripening fruit. Life, in its most exuberant, overflowing abundance, was Demeter's hymn of gratitude. She moved through the world like a force of nature, her joy radiating warmth and fertility. Temples overflowed with offerings, hymns of praise echoed in every village. Mortals, spared from extinction, celebrated with feasts and festivals, their gratitude as palpable as the heat haze rising from the earth. Persephone was immersed in this riot of life. She danced with her mother in sun-drenched fields, her laughter mingling with the buzzing of bees and the chirping of crickets. She wove garlands of poppies and cornflowers, her fingers remembering the old skills. She learned the intricate rituals of the nascent Eleusinian mysteries, the secret knowledge Demeter imparted about the cycle of grain, buried seed, dark dormancy, triumphant return, a mirror of her own journey. She felt the sun soak into her bones, banishing the lingering chill of the underworld. She was Kore, beloved daughter, lady of the spring. Yet, the transformation was not complete. The shadow of the pomegranate seed stretched long, even in the brightest noon. As the days grew long and lush, a subtle shift began within Persephone. The frantic energy of early spring mellowed. She found herself seeking shade beneath ancient oaks, drawn to the cool darkness of deep forests. The cacophony of midsummer life could sometimes feel overwhelming. She craved moments of quiet contemplation. She would sit by clear pools, not just to admire the reflections of flowers, but to gaze into the cool, dark depths, seeing echoes of another realm. She began to notice things others overlooked: the intricate beauty of fungi on decaying logs, the silent industry of worms enriching the soil, the way shadows pooled beneath the vibrant surface of life. She also felt the pull, not a physical summons, but a growing awareness, an internal tide turning. It was faint at first, a whisper on the edge of her consciousness as the sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent towards autumn. A sense of obligation, a connection stretching down into the cool, silent earth. The crown of the underworld, though physically left behind, began to feel like a tangible weight settling back onto her spirit. She would catch herself staring southward, towards places where the earth dipped into shadowy valleys or where ancient caves exhaled cool air. A restlessness stirred within her, a counterpoint to the sunlit joy. One afternoon, resting with Demeter in a field of ripening barley, Persephone spoke of it. "Mother," she began, her voice quiet, "the days grow shorter." She plucked a stalk, rubbing the grains between her fingers. The grain ripens. The time of harvest approaches. Demeter tensed almost imperceptibly. She had been dreading this, pushing the thought away like an unwelcome guest. She forced a smile. "It is the height of summer, Kore. The longest days are here. There is time yet. So much life." She gestured expansively at the golden field. Persephone nodded, but her gaze was distant. "Yes, mother. Abundance. But I feel it. The call. Faint, but growing stronger." She looked at Demeter, her eyes holding a quiet certainty. "The 6 seeds, their time approaches. Hades, the shades, they await their queen." Demeter flinched at the name. "Do not speak of him, or that place. You belong here, in the light." The old fear, the old rage, surfaced instantly, a protective instinct. "Mother," Persephone said gently but firmly, placing a hand over Demeter's. "I belong to both. You know this. The law binds me, and it is my duty now. I am not just Kore. I am Persephone. The shades have no voice, no champion but their queen. The realm needs order. She spoke with a conviction that startled Demeter. It wasn't resignation, it was acceptance, even a hint of ownership. My time below is not just a sentence, Mother. It is a responsibility, one I must honor. Demeter looked into her daughter's eyes, no longer pleading, but steady, resolved. She saw the maiden, yes, but also the queen. The carefree girl was still there, but layered with the gravity of one who has ruled in the land of the dead. The denial Demeter clung to felt suddenly hollow, selfish. She thought of the dying world her grief had caused, the suffering she had unleashed. Persephone was right. The cycle demanded balance. To deny her descent was to deny the very laws that allowed her return. Tears welled in Demeter's eyes, but they were different now, tears of reluctant understanding, of a mother letting go, not of her child, but of her exclusive claim. 6 months, she whispered, her voice thick. Only 6 months. Only 6 months, Persephone echoed, squeezing her mother's hand. And then I return. Like the seed returns. Like the sun returns. She managed a small smile. And in Eleusis, they will learn of this. Of the going down and the coming up. Of the love that endures both. The days continued, filled with sunlight and the heady scent of ripening fruit. But a new awareness hung between mother and daughter. They cherished each moment more fiercely, knowing it was numbered. Persephone walked the fields not just as the bringer of spring, but as one preparing for a journey. She gathered seeds, wheat, barley, poppy, not just for planting, but as talismans of life to carry into the gloom. She spent long hours with Hecate, who had appeared silently at the crossroads near Eleusis, a shadowy figure offering cryptic guidance about navigating the paths between worlds. The Titan spoke of the underworld's rhythms, of the Shade's needs, of the subtle politics of Hades' court. Persephone listened, absorbing the knowledge, preparing for her reign. As the first leaves began to blush with autumn's fire, the pull within Persephone became a constant thrum, a deep earth song only she could hear. The vibrant world began its own preparations for sleep. The frantic energy of summer mellowed. The light took on a golden, melancholic hue. The time of abundance was ending. The time of the queen's descent was near. Demeter watched the changing light, her heart a battlefield of love, grief, and the hard-won acceptance of the eternal cycle. She held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and growing things, storing it against the coming separation. The wheel was turning. The air in Eleusis grew crisp, carrying the first smoky scent of autumn. The vibrant greens of summer surrendered to a blazing tapestry of gold, crimson, and russet. Fields stood harvested, stubbled gold under a sky of deepening blue. Fruits hung heavy and ripe, their sweetness intensified by the cooling nights. It was a time of plenty, of harvest festivals and gratitude, yet beneath the celebration ran an undercurrent of poignant farewell. For Persephone, the queen of spring, was also the herald of the coming sleep. The pull within her was now a constant, resonant chord, vibrating in tune with the deepening earth. She moved through the autumnal landscape with a quiet grace, no longer the carefree maiden, but a sovereign preparing for her shift in realms. Her farewells were tender. She walked the sacred groves of Eleusis with Demeter, their hands clasped, speaking not of loss, but of the promise of return. She visited the simple shrines beginning to rise, dedicated to the mysteries, ensuring the priests understood the rites that would sustain hope during her absence. She gathered the last of the sun-warmed herbs, storing their essence. One evening, as the harvest moon, huge and golden, rose over the hills, Persephone sought out Hecate. The Titan stood at a lonely crossroads, illuminated by the moon and the twin torches she always carried. Her three faces, maiden, mother, crone, seemed to shift in the flickering light, embodying the cycle Persephone now lived. "It is time, daughter of two worlds," Hecate stated, her voices blending into one resonant whisper. "The veil thins. The path opens." Persephone nodded, her heart a mix of sorrow and a strange, solemn anticipation. "I am ready, guide." She carried a small pouch at her waist, seeds from Demeter's fields, a sprig of cypress, a smooth river stone warmed by the summer sun, tangible fragments of the upper world. "Remember," Hecate intoned, lifting her torches. "You walk not as captive, but as queen. The shades know your step. The realm awaits your presence. Hold the light within you, even in the deepest dark. It is your power now, as much as the shadows are." Demeter approached then, her face pale but composed in the moonlight. The raw grief was banked, replaced by a profound, aching love and the hard-won acceptance forged over the summer. She carried no garland of flowers, but a simple sheaf of ripe wheat, tied with a red ribbon, the color of lifeblood, the color of pomegranate seeds. "My daughter," Demeter said, her voice thick but steady. She embraced Persephone fiercely, then held her at arm's length, looking deep into her eyes. "My heart goes with you. Carry the light. Rule with wisdom. Remember the sun." She pressed the sheaf of wheat into Persephone's hands. "And know that every seed that sleeps in the dark earth awaits your return." "As I will." Persephone clutched the sheaf, the grains solid and real against her palm. "I will, mother. I will remember. I will return. Like the seed." She leaned forward, kissing Demeter's cheek. "Keep the world safe for spring." She turned towards the ancient, yew-shaded entrance to a sacred cave near Eleusis, a known threshold between worlds. Hecate moved ahead, her torches casting long, dancing shadows. Persephone paused at the mouth of the cave. The warm, fragrant air of the autumn night met the cool, damp breath rising from the darkness within. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of fallen leaves, ripe fruit, and wood smoke. She looked back once, at Demeter, standing tall and sorrowful in the moonlight, a goddess diminished but resolute, at the moonlit landscape, beautiful in its fading glory, at the sheaf of wheat in her hands. Then, squaring her shoulders, the queen of the underworld stepped into the darkness. Hecate's torches illuminated the first few steps of the rough-hewn passage, then the Titan herself seemed to dissolve into the shadows, becoming one with the path. Persephone walked on, the sounds of the upper world, an owl's call, the rustle of leaves, fading rapidly behind her. The air grew cooler, damper. The scent of stone and deep earth replaced the autumnal perfume. The path sloped downwards, winding deeper into the living rock. Above, as Persephone disappeared from sight, Demeter felt the familiar, icy pang of separation. But this time, it was different. It was not the chaotic terror of abduction, but the solemn ache of a necessary departure. She raised her hands. The warm wind stilled. The vibrant colors of the trees seemed to deepen, then slowly fade. A chill crept into the air. The first frost, delicate and glittering, spread like a silver veil over the stubbled fields where Persephone had last walked. The harvest was gathered. The time of letting go had come. Demeter closed her eyes, not in despair, but in focused communion with the sleeping earth. She sent her power deep, not to curse, but to nurture the dormant seeds, to blanket them against the coming cold, to hold the promise of life safe until the queen's return. Winter, gentle at first, then deepening, settled over the land. The cycle turned. The descent was familiar now, yet always profound. The utter silence, the cool, mineral scent, the palpable weight of the earth above, these were no longer terrifying, but the signatures of her other domain. The luminescent fungi guiding the path, the distant sighing of the shades, the resonant stillness of Erebus, they were the echoes of her kingdom. Persephone walked with purpose, the sheaf of wheat held firmly, a golden beacon in the gloom. Her step was measured, regal. She was not Kore returning to captivity, she was Persephone, queen, reclaiming her throne. She emerged into the vast throne room of Erebus. Hades sat upon his jet dais, as impassive as the stone itself. Yet, as Persephone approached, a subtle shift occurred. He did not rise, but his gaze, usually fixed on some distant point of eternity, focused entirely on her. He noted the wheat in her hand, the lingering scent of sunlight and autumn that clung to her robes, the new gravity in her bearing. He saw not just the maiden, but the queen who had walked in the upper world and returned. A flicker of something unreadable, acknowledgement, perhaps even a sliver of anticipation, passed through his dark eyes. Persephone, his voice rumbled, the sound vibrating in the still air. You return. I return, Lord Hades, she replied, her voice clear and calm, echoing slightly in the cavernous hall. She stopped before the dais, not bowing, but meeting his gaze directly. As the balance demands. As my duty requires. She held up the sheaf of wheat. I bring a reminder of the world above, of the life that sleeps, awaiting renewal. Hades' gaze lingered on the golden stalks, a symbol of Demeter's realm, brought into his sunless kingdom. It was an act of quiet defiance, a statement of her dual nature. He did not protest. He simply nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. It shall have a place, he stated. His gaze returned to her face. The realm has functioned, but order deepens with the queen's presence. Persephone felt the truth of his words. The shades drifting in the vast hall seemed to orient themselves subtly towards her. A silent expectation hung in the air. The underworld, in its own way, had awaited her. She ascended the steps of the dais, not as a supplicant, but as a sovereign. She took her place on the basalt throne beside Hades. The stone, cool and familiar, welcomed her. She placed the sheaf of wheat carefully beside her throne, a spot of vibrant gold against the dark stone. Then, she straightened, settling the mantle of her queenship around her shoulders. The maiden of spring was gone, the queen of the dead was present. Her reign began not with fanfare, but with attention. She listened to the silent pleas of the shades in asphodel, her presence alone bringing a subtle comfort, a sense of being seen. She walked the banks of the Styx with Hecate, ensuring Charon's tolls were fair. She visited the Elysian fields, where the shades of heroes dwelled in bliss, confirming their peace. She even ventured near the mournful borders of Tartarus, not to interfere, but to bear witness to the grim necessity of eternal punishment. She learned the intricate balance of the realm, the flow of souls, the silent bureaucracy of death. Hades, while remaining the ultimate authority, observed her. He offered no praise, but neither did he hinder her. He provided access, information, a silent partnership born of shared dominion over the inescapable. The profound silence of the underworld, once oppressive, became a space for reflection. Persephone found a different kind of beauty here, the stark elegance of polished obsidian, the intricate patterns of phosphorescent veins in cavern walls, the quiet dignity of the just shades. She tended her own small garden within the palace grounds, coaxing ghostly silver blooms and strange, luminous fungi from the rich, dark soil, a testament to life's persistence even here. She missed the sun, fiercely. She ached for her mother. But she also found a purpose, a deep resonance in bringing a measure of compassion and order to the realm of final rest. She was the bridge, the necessary light in the necessary dark. Above, winter held the world in its quiet grip. Snow blanketed the fields of Eleusis. Trees stood skeletal against gray skies. Rivers slept under ice. Demeter walked the frozen earth, her touch gentle now, nurturing the seeds deep below, whispering promises of spring to the sleeping roots. Her grief was a quiet companion, but no longer a tyrant. She tended the sacred hearth of the Eleusinian sanctuary, where initiates gathered in the depths of winter, performing the secret rites. In torchlit halls, shrouded in mystery, the story was told: the abduction, the grief, the descent, the pomegranate seeds, the return. It was a story of loss and restoration, of darkness endured and light regained, of the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter that mirrored the cycle binding all life. The initiates emerged not with specific knowledge, but with a profound, unshakable hope, the certainty that death was not an end, but a part of a greater, eternal return. The mysteries flourished, a beacon in the winter dark, fueled by Persephone's sacrifice and Demeter's enduring love. Deep below, Persephone felt the echo of those rites, a faint vibration through the earth's bones. She felt the slow, patient turning of the world above towards the light. She counted the months not with dread, but with the quiet certainty of the cycle. She ruled, she learned, she remembered the sun. And when the time was right, when the 6th month waned and the faintest stirring of life began deep in the frozen earth above, she would feel the counterpole. The call of the maiden would resonate within the queen. She would rise from her obsidian throne, pick up a single, perfect blossom coaxed from her shadowed garden, and begin her ascent. She would walk the path upwards, towards the waiting arms of her mother, towards the erupting green, towards the blinding, glorious sun. The queen would step into the light, and the maiden would dance once more in the meadows, her laughter mingling with the song of returning birds. The pomegranate seeds bound her to the dark, but they also guaranteed her return to the light. The wheel turned, eternal, necessary, beautiful in its duality. Life, death, and rebirth. The story of Persephone, forever written in the turning of the seasons and the enduring pulse of the earth.